welcome everyone to Color Commentary. And this week we're taking a break from the usual topic of discussion and moving to a slightly adjacent one. Today I'm joined by Usman Jamil. He's a writer for GatheringMagic.com, a host of the podcast The Third Power, and all around one of the most visible parts of the cubing community. How's it going, Usman?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right. Busy day at school, but I'm home. I've had dinner. I'm going to talk about Cube, one of my favorite things to do. So before we get super started, I do want to remind everyone we are on Patreon. There is, for $1, I think it's $1 a month, you can get access to the full unedited show with anything pre and post. This episode has actually about 14 or 15 minutes of us just talking back and forth, talking about upcoming set releases and all sorts of stuff. So if that sounds like it would appeal to you, your support is always helpful. It keeps us doing this on a weekly basis. So with that out of the way, Usman, I would love if you tell the folks at home who you are, kind of what you've been doing within your Magic career and all that good stuff. Sure.
So I guess when I started playing Magic, and it seems like kind of the cliche thing, just like to say how long you've been playing Magic or whatever. I started in around Revised and Fallen Empires, so I guess that'd be like 94, I guess. And as a person more than 20 years ago, didn't really know what I was doing. Played Magic, and then played until around Urza's Saga-ish or so. Yeah, I was around Urza's Saga block, and then Tolarian Academy happened, and it was this really broken, awkward deck, and it was kind of at this weird time when a lot of my friends were moving away, and it was kind of that did most of the damage, and then Mercadian Masks came out, and I looked at it, just kind of bought some packs, and was just it didn't really give me much incentive to come back to the game. So, I had a bunch of cards in my closet for a while, and I think a couple of years later, 2002-ish or so, I sold a lot of my cards, but thankfully I didn't really have anything worthwhile. I didn't have any duels, because I would feel terrible. Man, I sold my duels for $10. Didn't have anything like that. I think White Weenie was my jam, so I think I had some Armageddons and Winter Orbs or something. Nothing really super spectacular. And then every once in a while, I would lurk the WotC site, just kind of nostalgia for the game, and every once in a while kind of seeing stuff when Spiritmonger with the whole, you design, they pull the community and then get them to design a card. And at the time when I looked at it, it was Spiritmonger. And I remember looking at that, not having played for a while, and being this is ridiculous. Creatures have gotten that good, and this card is just stupid. I'm just all right. And then, however long later, lurking the WotC site, finding out that there was a pre-release for the new set at the time, Betrayers of Kamigawa. So I went to the pre-release. I think I did okay. But I remember, I think in my packs in the deck I had, it was I don't know if you remember the Patron cycle, where it was this.
Yes, the only cards printed with the offering ability, I believe.
That sounds right. Yeah, that's awfully. It's a kind of a dark. it's kind of Phyrexian in a way, but I remember I had a deck with the green one. I guess that's Patron of the Orochi or something, and there was some kid. And he seemed really interested, and I'm like, dude, if you want to, it's yours. I just kind of assumed I would do that and be done. So I just gave him my cards, and then, started meeting this, there was some guy who I'd been talking to, and he said that they were playing F&M, or, they would have drafts there every Friday. And I would show up, and, I wasn't very good, and then got better to where I was slightly not terrible. And that's kind of where I went from there. Mainly was a constructed player in my youth, and then became more of a limited player, as I kind of got older. And around the time of, and I guess this is the segue of how I got into Cube, there was a local group in my city. I live in St. Louis, Missouri, and there was a forum there which had a pretty lively like vintage scene going on around 2008 or so. And it was this kind of clique of people who were really into vintage. And because I wasn't part of said clique, I never got to, I think I watched them draft it once at like a Lorwyn pre-release or something, but I never drafted it myself. But, you know, they would post lists of it. And unfortunately, I'm unable to find it on archive.org because trying to find forum stuff on archive.org is awful because you can't really find anything. But I remember there was just like a bunch of really bad cards in there, like Spider Silk Armor and what's that, Ghostlit Stalker, the black one? I'm pretty sure that was it. So it's like 1 black mana for a 1/1, and you spend 4 black. Yeah, that's it. Ghostlit Stalker. Is it using? Yeah, so 1 black mana for a 1/1 creature spirit, 4 black, tap it. Target player discards 2 cards. Play this ability only at any time you could play a sorcery. Channel 5 and 2 black. Discard this. Target player discards 4 cards. You can play this only at a time you could play a sorcery. So it's like, obviously I didn't really know, and Cube kind of has its own kind of rules at the, you know, kind of its own kind of thing going on. But I'm thinking like, I don't really get it, but that seems really cool that, you know, cards like that would happen. And at the time, Evan Irwin, when he was doing the Magic show, he was talking about Cube, and kind of, he had an episode where it was like, I think it was like a Lorwyn episode. The episode was called Gleaming the Cube. And I want to say it was around that time, around 2008 or so. Maybe 2007. I think it was 2007 or so, maybe earlier. No, it was probably 2006. It was a while ago. Let's just say that it was probably a while ago. You know, of course, you can just go through the... Actually, I can look up Gleaming the Cube. If this awful, you can just cut and post too, I assume.
Always.
Yeah. Magic show. So let's see. When did it come out? September 13th, 2007. Okay. So that episode came out, and I thought it was really interesting. You know, just like, this seems really cool because it was like, that episode was him talking about Cube and, you know, designing your own set and like all this cool stuff like Moxes and Black Lotus. And, you know, what would you first pick? Would you first pick Vesuvan Shapeshifter or Moloku? And like a table of his friends talking about, you know, I would take this, and I would take this because of like all these legends are in the cube. And then half of the set, half the episode is about Lorwyn previews, which don't really mean much right now because that's been long out. But we're thinking that was really interesting and really cool. And then started building up my own cube. As old manny as this makes me sound, back in the day, there really wasn't a whole lot of cube resources out there. You know, there was no Cube Tutor. There was no, you know, I forget how many cubes lists there are on Cube Tutor, but I want to say at least 10K, if not like 15,000. There's a lot.
Oh, there's a lot. I think one of my cubes has a well into the 5 digits ID attached to it.
Oh, okay.
It's nuts.
Yeah, I think when I rebooted my Pauper Cube, I think it was 10,007. I think my regular cube's at 288 or something because I kind of jumped on that early. But there was no Cube Tutor. The only lists I really saw at the time were Tom Lapilli's cube. There's a site called like Snazorama, which was like some dude who had like a bunch of fancy foils, and like the MTG Salvation Cube forums, which were like, they had like a Design the Cube contest, and it was just terrible. Like all the decrees were in there, like the green decree, like what is it, Decree of Savagery or something?
Oh God, that one's not good if I remember. That's the one that does like counters.
Yeah, you get like counters, and you can cycle it to like put 4 counters on a dude or something. It's just terrible. But it was just so clunky and bad. But you know, it's just, there really wasn't a whole lot of thought to cube design at the time. And you know, when I was starting to build my cube, it was pretty rough. I mean, pretty much anybody's cube is going to be rough. I mean, in anything, you know, just like when you start any kind of endeavor, like when you start off, it's kind of rough. And especially when you look back, like if I looked at you know, when I listened to last the last time I listened to the pilot of the Third Power, it was rough. I remember like saying "good times" way too much, and Marshall being like, "Don't do that." I'm like, "All right, all right, Dan." But
okay, so there's this whole thing where Cube has come this huge way, and you've kind of been there for a good chunk of it, is what I'm hearing.
yeah, like back in that time, there really wasn't a whole lot of like Cube ideology. Like a lot of the articles about Cube kind of had the onus of introducing people to Cube because they had no idea what it was about. Like one of the early Cube articles by his name is Sam Gummersall kind of talked about Cube and how amazing it was, and then here's my list, and there you go. But a lot of it was just like, here's this cool thing called Cube, and that's it. You know, just not a lot of talk about design or theory or anything like that. Like a lot of that was still pretty rough. And when I was at that forum, a lot of the kind of theory kind of things were kind of developed, on the MTG Salvation Cube forums. And one of the things that kind of shaped my experience in Cube was drafting a Cube locally. And I remember drafting it, we went over to his house and it was a blast. But I remember a few things kind of really stuck out. One, there was a ton of multicolor stuff. And two, the aggressive decks were terrible. Now, if you've been paying attention, White Weenie was my jam back in the day. And I mainly consider myself like an aggressive player. But when it comes down to it, if a cube has really no aggressive deck, like if it's terrible, I'll just play like the most control-y deck that I can. And because it was just kind of felt like this weird kind of metagame where like the aggressive decks were terrible, and I didn't want that to happen. So the first Cube article that I wrote, it was kind of weird. When I started writing it, it was going to be called like Cube Pitfalls, and like, supporting aggressive decks in your cube. And I sent it to a friend, and he sent a response saying something like, I really liked it. I really look forward to telling me what I'm doing wrong in my cube next time. And he wasn't being sarcastic. I remember reading that. I'm like, oh, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to like, be a jerk or anything, but all right, I'll change the article title. And then I think I changed it to something like Cube Design Theory or something, and kind of talked about, here's what I did to design. I think I talked about cube design in general, but I also talked about kind of supporting the aggressive decks in your cube. And it seems like right now in a lot of cubes, it's easier to do that, but I still do see a lot of cubes that don't tend to really support their aggressive decks, or just kind of phone it in. And like essentially in the article I talked about, you need to actually push your aggressive decks. Like people were talking about back in the day about why Jackal Pup is bad, because if you draw it on turn 7 or turn 8 and they're drawing like Titans or like Sundering Titans or something, like this card's bad. And being like, why do you care about turn 7 in your aggressive decks? Like, why does that matter? And just kind of pushing that. And I had a blog. I still do. I don't really update it very often. Like called "I'd Rather Be Cubing," and I would write a lot in that blog. And eventually, I got picked up on Quiet Speculation, and did some articles there talking a lot about design, cube design, kind of stuff like that. Like a lot of the stuff, if you look at, like, for example, the Magic Online cubes, you look at cards like Lingering Souls, and that card being considered not just white, but Orzhov, because Orzhov decks are going to play it, not Boros or Azorius or something. Like, unless you're in really dire straits or have like a bunch of free fixing, for the most part, it's going to be an Orzhov card. And I came up with that idea a while ago, way before, it was kind of seen as quote unquote canon, or as whatever the status quo, and kind of talking about that, and people were just like, man, what are you doing? That's crazy. Kurt Ape, it's a red card. Why are you counting that as Gruul? It's like, because that's not what it is. Like, I have a degree in finance and an MBA, and working with like accounting stuff and seeing, like balance sheets and stuff like that, and seeing like, this is where it technically is, but this is where its role actually is. And thinking like, somebody could have Kurt Ape in their red section, but let's be completely honest, Rakdos ain't playing it, Burrows ain't playing it, Izzet ain't playing it, only Gruul's playing it. So let's try to categorize things to how they actually work. And also kind of at the time too, like a lot of cubes were very structured in terms of their design space. Like, it has to be, I think the initial cubes were 50 of each section, like 50 Wooburg, 50 white, 50 blue, whatever, 50 artifacts, 50 land, and then 60 multicolor to have 50 dual multicolor, and then one for each tricolor, which at the time was pretty noticeable just because you'd see junk like Intet the whatever, I forget what he's called.
I was gonna say, before cons, like that chunk of it, like the wedges particularly, had to be pretty bad.
Yeah, I know Planar Chaos made a bunch of dragons, but like Guided Passage and Teamer, like some of the Apocalypse kind of stuff, like they were rough. They were really bad. Like Degavolver, like the Volver cycle, like they were rough. But people would put that kind of stuff in because you have to have the whole cycle. And in my writing, I kind of talked about kind of breaking down a lot of those establishments, just like these sections that were like, they had to be exactly even. And, on that episode of the Magic Show, that he talks about how each section, I guess Mardu section, white, red, black, those sections are 50-50. They have to be 50 creatures, or 25 creatures, 25 non-creatures. And blue can have more spells because it's the spell color, and green can have more creatures because it's the creature color, which ended up also kind of constraining things because, say there's a really good creature in white, but the quote-unquote obvious cut is a non-creature. Well, guess you're kind of doomed there. You have to take out a creature to put it in. It just didn't make sense. It was just like, why are these kind of like these ideas kind of seen as just like, you can't change this? Like when I talked about changing sections and talking about building the bedrock of your cube, it's just like, you have to have it 50. Like I remember like changing it to like 51 or 52, and someone's like, why are you doing that? It's like, why not? Just to change stuff. It's like, it's not right. It's 51. I'm like, why? Why does that matter? It's like, it doesn't look right. It's like, why? Like, because it's not like a multiple of 5 or something. That doesn't make sense. And just kind of talking about stuff like that in my writing, just like building the foundations of your cube. I eventually was picked up and wrote for Star City Games for a while, and then now I'm writing at Gathering Magic. And admittedly, I'm not doing as much theory-based writing, but I have some ideas in my head that I've been kind of mulling around for a while, and who knows if that's going to come out eventually. But it's just kind of a lot of these kind of challenges. Just like one of the big things in Cube was, I think it was around like 2010, 2011, about signets are too good for your cube, and writing an article about that, kind of talking about the methodology we used for testing, and then finding that's not true, and then finding people not listening to it. It's like, all right, well, here's some information. But yeah, I think that's kind of the thing, is just kind of, I think a lot of my cube writing was a lot about kind of design and theory kind of based writing, as opposed to where a lot of it was kind of not really based in theory. It was just kind of like, this is what feels right, or like, these are the best cards in Magic. Because essentially, whenever people talk about cube, and not just like cubes with power, or just within their constraint, even like a pauper cube, hashtag tie-in to stuff, is, just like within that constraint, just the idea of a cube is to maximize, maybe not necessarily maximize power, but to have powerful stuff happen, or, design a good environment. I think that's pretty much what I would personally say is the sign of a good cube or a good environment, is one where, say you're in like when I drafted that other cube, like whenever I would draft it later after having built my own cube, like whenever I would draft it, I would force like the dirtiest of decks. I'm usually at least 10 non-basics, usually like all multicolor, like at least like 4 or 5 signets, and then just like anything. It's like a ham sandwich as long as it's fine. Just like, sure, play this and whatever. And it usually just crush people because the aggressive decks just weren't there. I remember drafting another local one, which kind of had the same kind of issue where the aggressive decks just weren't supported. And it had like talismans instead of signets to try to make the situation better. And I think I remember in one of those decks, and there was also a league where it was like a $20 buy-in, so more incentive to try to do well. I think I remember one of the decks I had was like Ambassador Laquatus. Like, y'all remember that?
Oh God, that is your win con?
That was one of the win cons, yeah. 1 blue for a 1/3, and like I forget, it's like pay 3 to mill somebody or something. Yeah, just like stuff like that. Just because I'm not being pressured, so I'm gonna go over the top of everybody, and that was my plan. And like being a consummate aggro player, I was like, this isn't really a good meta. Like, this is not a balanced meta. Like, what are you doing? And I guess, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to kind of say, like, this is kind of segmenting into the sort of introduction here, like the idea behind Cube, and sort of I'm fully aware that a decent amount of our listenership is people who are a little bit on the newer side of Magic. And I think kind of like talking about Cube and specifically the sort of the elevator pitch of Cube, if you will, to people who perhaps have not had a chance to experience this, because I do truly believe, and this is one of my least popular takes with people, is that Cube is the best casual format, and I am including EDH in that. And that's the point where people usually get upset with my opinion, because I enjoy EDH, but I would much rather be cubing almost every time.
Why would people get upset over an opinion? That just, like, if someone would say EDH is better than Cube, I'd be like, okay, I mean, sure. I don't know. That just seems weird. But like, I personally, I don't know. I mean, I guess it hits certain notes for different people, but again, I don't know if it's mainly from playing a lot of limited, but it's, just kind of seeing, like, opening a pack and like drafting like a deck, I think is really interesting. And I think a lot of the master sets were influenced by that, because I think Tom Lapilli was one of the, I think he designed like one of the master sets, I want to say 2015 or something. And I guess I forgot to mention this earlier. Like, I've had a cube with power for, I think, like 2007-ish or so over a decade. And I've had a pauper cube, maybe, no, I think it's been less than that. No, I think it was, because I remember getting some sleeves in 2008, so it's about 10 years. And then building a pet pauper cube, someone had one locally and kind of had the similar kind of tropes where, aggressive decks were really bad. And I think I remember we used to draft Denny's after F&M. We drafted his pauper cube one time, and just remember being capsized, locked out of the game. And, it's a Denny's, so it's all pretty close quarter. And we're just turning to him like, has an aggressive deck ever 3-0'd like your draft, like, ever? And then he got kind of defensive, and I forget what he said, but I was like, the aggressive decks are really bad, dude. They need work. They really need work. And I think he took some steps to make them better, but like, he moved like for grad school or something. I think not super long. Like, he's starting to make some steps towards it, and then he moved. So I don't even know if he still plays Magic anymore. But I don't know. Like, I think an interesting thing about Cube is I think it combines the best parts of constructed and limited, where in constructed, there's, I guess, a lot of homogeneity in terms of, like, say, for example, I say Dinrovatron or Stompy, or, and I'm just keeping all these Pauper relevant because our audience, but, you know, say, Coldotha, like Coldotha Boros or something, or Monarch Boros, you know, all those are pretty straightforward. Like, if you go to MTG Goldfish, a lot of those lists are going to be relatively stock. Like, you know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's a little bit less, you know, diversity. And the thing about Cube is there are, I actually checked, there's over 100,000 on Cube Tutor at this point. And,
wow.
And I'm willing to bet that, barring people who have copied a list just to hang on to it, most of them are different. Like, it might only be one or two cards, but the difference between, you know, you have a powered cube and a pauper cube, and I'm willing to bet there's probably, I'm going to guess, maybe 10 cards shared between the two of them in the total list.
I don't know. I'm going to rifle through it.
I was gonna say, I imagine the cantrips managed to make it into.
Yeah, let's see. So at least Mogwar Marshall, Boros. Yeah, I'm gonna just rifle through these real quick. Not a whole lot, I would say. I'd say more than 10, maybe like 30. Like, yeah, a lot of the burn spells like Lightning Strike, Chain Lightning, Smash the Smithereens, Incinerate, Lightning Bolt, Searing Blaze. I don't know. A decent amount of red stuff, but as it turns out, there's a lot of good red burn, as it turns out.
Yeah. So I guess the elevator pitch for Cube, and this is what I've always gone with, has been that limited is deeply enjoyable, deeply skill testing, but also kind of on the expensive side of things. And wouldn't it be great if you could pick out a limited environment that you were super, super happy to play in, but also never cost you money again in the abstract?
Yeah, and Pauper Cubes are pretty cheap anyway. Like, once you buy, I think Chain Lightning's gone down a lot since it's been reprinted.
Chain Lightning's like $2 or $3 at this point.
Yeah, that's not bad at all. I think I have a Eternal Masters foil now, I think. But yeah, like, a lot of it's pretty cheap, and keeping up with new sets, you know, is definitely cheap. And also, just like in a lot of limited environments, you see a lot of cards, there's like, you know, obvious 15th pick, just some cards that are just trash, and they really don't serve much of a purpose. Like, there was some article by Mark Rosewater talking about, like, what role bad cards play, you know, just as like a point of comparison. Like, not every uncommon can be Ravenous Chupacabra. You know, there has to be just like some really bad cards. There has to be like a Mudhole or something. But in a cube, they don't really serve much of a format, or, you know, don't really serve a purpose. Like the professor from Tolarian Community College talked about, he did some videos about cube and then kind of defining what a cube is, like what a good cube is, and talking about how, like, a cube should have no jank, you know, should have no junk, you know, like no obvious 15th picks. And that makes sense to an extent. Like, there's no cards that are just terrible. Like, obviously nobody has a Grey Ogre in their cube, but again, that's a kind of a bit of a straw man because nobody should. And like, if they do, it's just kind of like a stupid joke that doesn't matter. It's just like, I remember there was one card when we had a 10-person cube draft, and there was, all the cards were accounted for but one. And I was off doing Pokemon Go stuff at the time, you know, because we had 11. So I sat out because I like watching people play Magic and being able to see what's going on. At least I get a lot more out of it than somebody being kicked out and be like, all right, well, see ya, so I can play. I mean, homie don't play that. So I was off doing Pokemon Go stuff, and then they text me about it, and then I didn't see it until I get back, and they're like, did you get to see the text? I'm like, no. And they were like, yeah, there's a card missing. So we just proxied on the back of it, like, Tree of Redemption, because LOL, that's a joke. I'm just like, nobody's going to play it. Like, it's just a blank card. Like, I get, like, LOL meme, this is like a useless card in Masters 25, but it serves no purpose. I'm just like, hold on, I'm just going to proxy something that people are actually going to play. So it's like, what card am I not playing right now? Okay, Ankh of Mishra. And then you just wrote in Sharpie, and it was like, all right, here you go. But that's a thing I think is nice about having a cube as well as being able to design your own environment to whatever goals, I think, as well. There's cubes that are kind of power constrained, not having certain cards in because of wanting to kind of curtail the environment, or them being, just wanting to kind of have a power level that's kind of overall lower than kind of your regular cube, without power or with power, or whatever, just kind of lowering that power level and being able to define it too. I think that's, for me at least, being able to kind of define that power level. And I think also it was actually something I kind of realized when talking to a friend is like, my name, Usman, it's not exactly a, American, it's not exactly a common American name. And as you may be able to figure out, my ethnicity is, South Asian. My parents are from Pakistan. The reason I bring this up is within that culture, there's a lot of emphasis on like hospitality. When you go over to somebody's house, to like, if they offer you water or something or stuff that you probably should drink it or something, you just like, whenever you go to someone's house, it's like they're your guest, and to treat them really well. And I think that's kind of the same way in the South, like Southern hospitality. And I think that's also a thing which kind of is nice about that too, in designing a cube, is being able to design an environment for people that, people enjoy, people being able to draft it. I remember there was some guy who I hadn't seen in years, Caleb Shearer, who has kind of gotten a name for playing Storm and being on the SCG leaderboard. And he, for some reason, he was like randomly at the shop that I was at like a couple weeks ago. And, he was taking apart his deck, and I don't think he saw me in the background. He's like, yeah, I really always enjoy drafting Usman's cube. It's always gas. And, he didn't say it because I was there. He was just saying it in general. I'm like, whoa. I was like, well, that's really cool. Thanks.
Yeah, there's definitely like a big aspect, at least for me, about like cube is designed for what, like when I set out to first like build my peasant cube, I designed something that I would like, but then like going back and refining it time after time to figure out what other people enjoy doing with it.
Yeah.
And kind of like honing in on that, so that, because it is really like, I don't know about you, but most of the time when I cube, it's not with strangers. It's usually with friends, or at least friends of friends.
Yeah.
And it definitely, you're designing something for these people and you want it to be a good experience. You don't want them to be miserable. And
yeah, I think at first, when I was starting to get around to cubing, for a while I didn't really have a group, and I would really struggle to get enough people to cube. And I've gotten a local group, a few regulars, which usually is enough to draft. And yeah, I think it's being able to create something that people enjoy, which in a way kind of happens with EDH too. You create an environment within a certain play group, and you kind of have a camaraderie, and essentially it's a lot more laid back too, kind of, or at least it depends on the group. Like you could have really cutthroat EDH groups, and it's just like, okay. Or you can have EDH metas where it's really slow and nothing happens, and people are at a table playing for like 3 hours or something. And that comes from experience. That's actually something that kind of made me not, as another thing I didn't want to have happen in cube, where just a lot of people are just bored and not doing anything. I was like, I don't really want that to happen.
So I do want to touch on something, because you have put like a very heavy emphasis on the fact that you like your aggro cube decks. And I guess before we really get into that, I think like if someone is interested in cube, sort of where would you point them? Would you suggest that for a beginning person who wants to get into cube, that they should look at other people's lists and build their own from that, or just copy someone's list outright and make adjustments with it?
So honestly, like I remember before being really bad about not wanting to plug my own lists. Kind of like when people would say like, hey, what cube would you recommend? And, me being like, I don't want to recommend my own list just because it would feel cheap. And nowadays I just don't care. It's like, whatever. Here's my list. I really enjoy it. But especially in the early days of Cube, when there weren't a lot of lists out there, it was kind of kind of reverse engineering like what worked, or seeing what was going on in a lot of lists. But sometimes like cube adoption rates don't necessarily tell the entire story. Like a card might be really popular in a certain like community or something, or it might be underrepresented or something. Like personally, I guess when looking at kind of cube lists in general, like it's one thing to like look through a list, and it's again kind of easier with Cube Tutor nowadays. You can look at converted mana costs, you can look at sections and kind of look at that. I know personally, whenever I look at a cube list and I look at the kind of early drops and there's 2 1-drops in red, I'm just like, okay. And then look to the right and see no signets. I'm just like, okay, I guess I'm going blue-white control or something whenever I draft this cube. But I don't know, like, as funny as it sounds, even just like watching Moto streams, whenever they have cube going on, it's not like the perfect analog, but I know personally I put some cards in my list, and some other cards ended up catching on from that too. I think like Show and Tell and Sneak Attack were some that weren't played as much pre-Moto Cube, and then they caught on. I think Opposition's another big one. I know for me, I think Riftwing Cloudskate worked really well from that. But I think even just asking like the cube designer as well is just like, how is this card played out for you? Although personally, whenever I find myself asking that question, I usually tend to try to find out like if they have any like deck lists that have played it and have been good. Like if they 3-0'd a draft or something, because you can have like someone can be really gung-ho about a card. It's like, man, look at this. I don't know. Look at this wizard theme I have going on in my cube, and look at all these cards for it. If you just look at a list, you're just like, okay, here's this wizard theme going on, but you have no idea if it's any good or not. And, if you ask the designer, like, have these been good? Like, that can definitely help doing that. I remember seeing, like, somebody's list with kind of, like, this weird kind of theme, and asking him, it's like, has this won? Like, is this 3-0'd a draft? And he said no. I'm like, all right, well, all right then. Sure. But I think that's it. It's kind of like there's this cooking show called Good Eats. I don't know if anybody in the audience is familiar with it, because it's no longer really on the air, but it kind of got me into cooking. It was by this guy named Alton Brown, which kind of similar to Ish. Well, I don't want to say similar. I don't want to compare myself to Alton Brown because he's a culinary god. But a lot of Q, or at least Q. There's a lot of, at the time when the show kind of started, a lot of cooking shows were very basic. It's just like, here's how to make this recipe. Like, I'm Julia Child. Here's how you make this, I don't know, duck à l'orange or something. You make this. Here's how you do this. Like, here's this recipe. Here are the steps. Here are the ingredients. Boom, boom. There you go. Like, that's it. Like, there's no context. They may talk about, different stuff when they're cooking, but that's it. Not much context, and, didn't really give much info. Alton Brown, he worked in like film and stuff, and then decided to go to culinary school because it was something he'd been passionate about. He came up with this show called Good Eats, and usually it would be like theme based, like about, I think the one that kind of made me fall in love with the show was about potatoes, and he would talk about, just like, this is the history of potatoes. They used to be a poison. He would obviously do it in a much better verbal cadence than I do, but hey, he gets paid for it. I don't. So there you go. Talk about, this is the, potatoes came from the nightshade family, as far as I know. And like, there's these kind of potatoes, waxy potatoes, boiled potatoes, red potatoes. And this is kind of the biology. A big thing of his was talking about like the science of cooking. He's talking about like when it reaches a boil, this is what happens with the molecules and whatever. So like this kind of stuff goes on. And with this in mind, this is how you make this recipe. And it's like, here's how you make mashed potatoes, and kind of talking about, this is why you do this. And this is what, just like talking about different kind of stuff and kind of building on lessons to make you more rounded. No pun intended. But and it's like, say you learn about this episode about turkey, for Thanksgiving, and we talk about brining, talking about osmosis, talking about how basing a turkey is pointless because it doesn't do anything. And you would learn these lessons along the way to kind of build your knowledge on that. The reason I bring up this tangent, by the way, if you listen to Third Power, I go on tangents all the time. So my apologies for y'all in the audience, and thank you for still being here. But one of the things he talked about, which is kind of a good idea, he said, whenever you're buying like meat or something, like buying meat or fish or something, you go to a butcher, ask him a question you already know. And base that on, just kind of say, how do you like your, say I'm getting a, I don't know, New York strip. How should I cook this? What wines go with this? Like what goes well with the sausage or something? And the answer, you got to base it on that. If you ask a cube designer something like, hey, what do you think of sulfuric vortex? That was another card I think kind of shot up way high after it was used in Magic Online. It was kind of under the radar, and now people all lots of cubes have it as like their best red card or one of their best red cards. But if somebody, like, you talk to me about sulfuric vortex and you're like, this card sucks, like it makes you lose life, and why do you want to play a card that makes you lose life and you can't even gain life, so you can't even use it with Sword of War and Peace? Like, and you hear this and you're just like, all right, this makes no sense at all. Like, this is ridiculous. It's like, all right, thank you for your time. Whatever. It's kind of like that, where in kind of a lot of environments with cube, I think is there's definitely context to it, and people can get defensive and say like, well, in my cube, this card is amazing, even if that doesn't, it doesn't match reality. But in a format, say, I'm kind of in that way where when I got back in Magic, I would follow formats, but I wouldn't play it. And I've been doing that with Pauper in a way. Like, I don't really know as much, so I'm going to outsource any mess ups to you. So if I say something wrong, please correct me. But say, for example, someone asks me, what do you think of, what's that red card with Monarch? Like crown something. It's like 4 red.
Crown Hunter Hireling. That actually is not available on MitGo yet.
Oh yeah, because yeah, wow, that's true. Okay, so let's say for example, somebody wants to make a Kuldotha Boros Monarch deck. I don't even think that's a thing. Okay, Monarch Boros. There we go. And you're talking about conceptuals, like, what if this card is really, so let's say new treasure chests come out and the Pauper community really wants this crown guy. I don't even remember his name, but I'm too lazy to look it up or remember. This is outcry. We really want 4 red mana crown guy. That really makes a bad chant. I don't think that's going to catch on. I don't think it's going to work, y'all. I don't think it's going to work. But say that happens. We get into the treasure chest, and then people start brainstorming before they see an announcement. They say treasure chest, new crown guy, and it's a common, and it'll appear whatever. But it's not in the wild yet. People don't know. And you can theorize, be like, what do you think of this card in Boros Monarch? That is a deck, right? Okay, hooray.
Yeah. It is top tier at that. So we're good.
Hooray. Yeah, I didn't mess that up. So let's say we just want to theorize, just like, how will this card be in there? Well, it costs 4 and a red. It's a 4/4. And, it can't attack. But, it's another Monarch card. It can defend really well. Like, you start going through the talking points, in your head, without testing it, just like, okay, it can do this, but it costs 4 in a red, so that might be too expensive. It's a lizard, so I don't know. It's a Viashino. I don't know. So, so it's probably ugly. We got all these talking points, but, costs, it does this. It's a 4/4. So here's up, matches up with this. But it's still just kind of theorizing. It's all just in your head. But once it comes out, eventually the hive mind will figure it out. Like, people will try it out. It'll work. It won't work. The meta game will shift. Like when Burning Tree Emissary came out and people were just like, this card is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. But, just like, what's this going to do? How is this going to impact Stompy? How is this going to affect red deck wins? Like, is the best Burning Tree deck going to be red deck wins playing with like Burning Tree and Valley Dasher and the red cohort, or is it going to be Stompy with like Vault Scourges to be able to use that 1 mana? Being able to use that red mana, that'd be kind of useless. What's it going to be? Again, kind of theorizing, have no idea. But once it gets out to the metagame, that all gets defined, and you can kind of outsource it to there. By the way, I have no idea where this tangent was going or where it originated. So,
so it originated when I was asking like how people should like view a cube list if they're looking to get into cube, and I think it does like bring up some very good things. Like nothing beats experience.
I think I got way too in the nitty gritty in terms of the macro versus the micro. Man, and if you really want to cut this in post, this episode, you certainly have a lot of stuff to cut. But I think...
Oh, no. I knew exactly what I was getting myself into. I listened to your podcast.
It's like, oh dear. So I think when getting into cube, I think if you do know somebody locally with a list, like that can certainly help. It's not as esoteric because like whenever cubes go online, that's pretty much whenever you look on twitch.tv and you look at cube lists, you look at Magic the Gathering, oh boy, it's all Moto Cube. It's all just like that. And so you can get a pretty decent look at that, but there's really not much in terms of Pauper Cube or Peasant Cube. And it's kind of, in terms of that representation, almost what it was like back in like the early 2008s, early 2000s almost, where it's a bit more esoteric. You talk about a Pauper Cube and there's not a whole, like, say you want, like, talk about Vintage Cube or Legacy Cube. You can look that up on YouTube and see LSV playing Vintage Cube or watch Nami doing it. But Pauper Cube, there's not really much. The only real Pauper Cube thing I saw in terms of, like, video content was Loading Ready Run had copied Adam Staborski's Pauper Cube list and then used that for a draft. And it was like, they had 6 people. And unfortunately, they just had like players A and B play against each other, C and D, and then E and F. And that was it. But it still kind of gives a decent impression of what Pauper Cube is like. If I was to say personally what defines a Pauper Cube, a Pauper Cube versus like a regular cube, defining regular cube, quote unquote, as cubes with rares in it, I would say, and I'm guessing y'all probably know this from Pauper Constructed, is that the finishers are generally worse. Like, there's no Titans. There's Smelldrifter. I guess the best is like there's Frost Titan at rare, and there's Ether Snipe at common.
Oh man,
yeah.
When you put it that way, that really does like just a smack to the gut. That.
Yeah, there's no Ugin. There's Ulamog's Crusher.
Yeah,
there's no Flametongue Kavu. There's Gitu Slinger.
that said, you've managed to jam in some. I've got your list open here, and like there's some pretty decent finishers here. Like I'm like Gurmag Angler is constructed playable, but also definitely limited playable. But I'm also seeing stuff like Twisted Abomination, which I love to death as a card. Mm-hmm. We've got the duo of Bastion Inventor and Benthic Giant as just 4-power hexproof things.
Like skittering monstrosity.
Crustacean.
Yeah, crustacean. Why would they call it monstrosity? That doesn't make sense. Yeah, like
because it has monstrosity.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm like, I don't think they would be like, calling it, like, it would be like if they were to call a creature like hexproof dog or something, and it's a hexproof hound. It's like, I was like,
but yeah, like the finishers aren't as good. And combo is generally rarely a thing in these cubes. Like, yes, you can technically build a storm deck, but it's not going to be good or enjoyable. I also don't care for storm as an archetype in most cubes, but
yeah, a lot of the times it requires a lot of parts that aren't very good on their own, and they're pretty much just for storm decks. I know, like, to plug my own list, I'm assuming you're putting this in the show notes, like the list.
Oh,
link to my list. Hooray. So there's definitely a lot of, there's not as many Pauper lists out there as quote unquote regular cubes. There's, His name is Adam Staborski. I believe he's the managing editor at TCG Player. He used to be at Gathering Magic. I mean, he pretty much hired me for Quiet Speculation and at Gathering Magic. So, I've known him for a very long time. And we used to talk a lot about Pauper Cube and stuff. I believe he has some signed cards that I got for him. There was like an Incinerate, which like Mark Poole's in town. I was like, I forget how I had him altered. It has like a barbecue and like a chef's hat or something. Like, do this. I got a friend who wants this. And like he has a list that's pretty well copied. There's a YouTuber's name. His first name is Mark. I don't know his last name. I probably should have looked this up before then. But his YouTube channel is called Life Begins at 20, and he's been doing a kind of a build around series of kind of the sections on what he's doing. He built a Pauper Cube and is kind of going through step by step. His Twitter account has his Cube Tutor list, and kind of he goes through those in each of his videos. I believe he's on red right now. I don't think he's done green as of the time of this recording.
And he's been putting out some very enjoyable content. Like it's definitely enjoyable to see someone sort of go through the rationale behind every card in a cube, because frankly that's an absurd undertaking from my point of view.
Yeah, I was going to try to do something like that, and like my video, like I'd probably make it look like MS Paint or something, like like Timmy's first video or something. It would just look terrible. But yeah, like that's a really good one. There's a few things that I've been doing in my own personal list, and like again, it kind of feels like back in the day when I was kind of wading through uncharted waters with there's definitely like an artifact quote unquote theme going on. And I don't know, whenever I hear people talk about a theme going on, like a theme, like I have a whatever theme, like a lot of the times they don't usually tend to end up working out, or usually they don't work out as well as they would hope. So like I have an affinity theme with cards like, Court Homunculus. That's definitely like Glint Hawk, I think, is another one. Ardent Recruit, a lot of stuff like that, which kind of came about from somebody who had a cube. He still does, but he just doesn't do as much cube stuff. His name is Matt Cranstuber, also known as Cranny. A few years ago, he talked with me about when he would power up his cube and then put a lot of stuff with affinity in there. And it was kind of like that and Modern Masters. I think it was 2015, right? The one with like Frogmite and all the affinity stuff.
Yeah, 2015. I think Blue White's archetype was supposed to be affinity.
Okay, yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of those just blend together for me. But yeah, like I think that's what caused me to reboot my Pauper Cube. It was kind of unfortunate. My friend David, he lives in California, and he asked me if I could like update my list or something, and he copied my Pauper Cube, and he had the professor from Tulare Community College draft my cube. He said it was good, but I really wished that he had drafted my rebooted list, just because I've been very happy with it. Like affinity is definitely something that I've been pushing in that it's been working out pretty well.
It doesn't hurt. I'm looking through some of the recent additions here. Like Guardian Idol's a pretty decent get,
yeah.
And you've gone as far as to have all the artifact lands in here as well.
Yeah, that was something Cranny and I talked about too, is like the artifact lands, and that was something like I had never really seen before in any cube list. I'm like, that's really cool. But it kind of ruminated in my head for some time, and then eventually I was just like, you know what? I'm completely rebooting it. And that's what I tend to do on Cube Tutor. I don't tend to do updates. I just tend to just be like, I'm just going to reboot everything. I don't know why. It's just probably because it takes too long. But that said,
also making cuts is always harder than just saying I'm going to start from scratch.
Yeah.
Like the most difficult part of maintaining a cube is going like, all right, I've got these 6 sweet cards from this new set that I want to put in. Now, which 6 sweet cards do I want to pull out?
Yeah. And I think it's something I think I've talked about, not necessarily in writing, but in terms of at least on the podcast, is kind of, so the initial cube ideology was essentially like the best cards in Magic. That was really the sales pitch, like you referenced in terms of cube. It's like, you draft, why do you want a cube? Look at this pack. Look at this 15 cards from the best cards in Magic. And that was kind of used as kind of a selling point for a cube, and as kind of the idea for what the kind of ethos of Cube is, which makes sense, but it's not the be-all, end-all of Cube. And, it's just like when talking about adding cards and cutting cards, it's just like when people say like, oh, no love for card X, which seems to almost derive from an outdated ideology of this card is bad. Like, okay, I'm adding in, like you said, 6 cards in a new set. Okay, what am I going to take out? All right, this card, it's just like, okay, this card's bad, this card's bad, this card is like, that's not really how it works. Like the quote unquote bad cards are gimmies. Like those are easy. Like it's like people talking about burn, the deck. It's like you have your easy wins, it's just like, here's some lava spikes and I'll untap my Thermo Alchemist. Those are easy wins. It's just like, all right, hit you, and whatever. It's easy. But the harder games are ones where you really have to work for it. It's like, how do I gauge my resources versus what did my opponent have? What do I discard, or how do I utilize my resources really well? Like that's what the real, that's how you really, that separates the goods from the greats or whatever. And in terms of making Cube changes, I'd always talked about kind of having a holistic approach to Cube and how cards can interact with each other. Sometimes, just like adding certain cards and cutting certain cards can have an effect. But personally, what I've found has been really useful is looking realistically at your data. I did an article for SEG talking about, using data, like using spreadsheets to track your Cube and like what's working and what isn't. But let's be frank, a lot of people don't have time for that because, all right, here's this deck. Here's this 3-0 deck. All right, let's find Acacian Javelineers. Okay. It had 2 before. Okay, let's change that to a 3. Okay. What's the next card? Secluded Steppe. Okay, let's go to lands. Okay. All right. Secluded Steppe. Where are you? Okay, we had 4. Let's change that to 5. Okay. Like that's, you ain't got time for that. No. Most people ain't got time for that. What I've personally found useful is, using like taking a picture of your 3-0 deck, and also like maybe the deck that like played in the finals, and just using that as a comparison. I used Moto just because I was a dummy and didn't use a phone case on my old phone, and it looked like a potato. Everything was all scratched and it looked terrible. So I'm like, I can't use that. I'm just going to load this into Moto. And then I got a new phone and a case, but I still do that just to make everything consistent. And I sent you the last 6 3-0s that I had from my cube, from my Pauper cube, that is. And are you putting those in the show notes too, or is it just kind of okay?
Yeah. I think I'm probably gonna make like a little imager folder of them. But there's diversity here. Like I'm looking through. We've got this black green kind of grindy rock deck. It gets all sorts of sweet things like tumble magnet and serrated arrows.
Yeah, I think it was like what Rampaging Hippo was one of them too. The cycler.
Yeah, the big old just brick. Like
yeah.
That's one of my favorite things that's happened with Pauper is like we've always had like this abundance of like high drop creatures that are big and like kind of efficiently costed, but now they're actually getting keywords put on them, so they're actually good.
They should have just word big.
But then
this thing is just large.
Yeah. And then we've got like this this mostly mono white deck that's splashing green for, stupid things like Quasali Pride Mage and Vines of Vastwood and Elephant Guide.
Yeah, Vines of Vastwood. Yeah, I played against him. We did a 4-person draft, and that was round robin. And I've been trying to draft like the 5-color, Signet Bounce Land deck, the Dirtle-tastic deck. I think that week I just felt like it. I was just like, I don't know, man. I'm just going to draft this deck. I got crushed. Like, oh my God, I just got my head bashed in. Like, I remember Snubhorn Sentry was usually a 3/3. I think I remember one time he cast it and then used it for Ramosian Rally. I'm like, what am I at? Like 3? He's like, no, you're dead. I'm like, I was like, dude, that's awesome. And not being sarcastic because like, personally, like, I kind of like seeing that stuff happen. I think that's another cool thing about being a cube designer too, is just like seeing that kind of stuff happen. Just like, I don't know if that's just me or just seeing like somebody forking back a chain lightning, or seeing somebody draft a deck like this with Flare Husk and Borrowed Grace and Heliad's Pilgrim getting a Chomano's Blessing, kind of cool stuff like that. But I think that also kind of helps with kind of really defining things. That was something I did in my article for SEG, and this was years before really Moto had publicly at least talked about using that kind of data for Cube. So I think it started with Randy Buehler, who started taking the helm for Cube stuff. But that was again after the article that I did about using data. But it kind of helps with helping to take some of the abstractness out and being able to have a better picture of your cube. Just like, I think one of the main big articles I had in my day when I was writing for SCG was, like I said, when I was talking about the cube article about signets and bounce lands. Tom Lapilli, who, again, I'm not sure if the audience is super familiar with who he is. He was a really big cube proponent around like the late 2000s, and ended up getting a job at WotC for design stuff based on his cube experience. And he wouldn't really be able to write articles because he was working at WotC, but occasionally he would write on Twitter about cube stuff. And one of the things he tweeted about was, he said, "I took the signets and bounce lanes out of my cube because they were making green and attack decks bad." And I was like, okay. And so I went about doing a methodology. Did some drafts with the signets, just as normal, just normal signets. And then, I think I did like 5 or 6 drafts or something. And then another 5 or 6 drafts with, I think it was like with analogs or something. I don't think I had the talismans or just other artifacts like Mind Stone, Prismatic Lens, Cold Steel Heart or something. And found the meta didn't really change. Like, I think maybe people, like one person played like a mono white deck or something, but like that didn't really change. And granted, 5 drafts isn't a huge sample size, but like I'd been drafting, like, I forget when I took out of those signets. I did a blog post about it, but I want to say at least 4 or 5 years, and found the signets really weren't, because I'd kind of toyed with, using some of the bounce lands, using like a land section with, say, dual lands, fetches, man lands, or creature lands, or whatever they're called, and then like some other wild card land, like a pain land for Boros, or a bounce land for the slower colors, and like signets as part of the multicolor or something. That was something I toyed around with, and then ended up just doing full cycles. But I've done this for a while, and then haven't found cube like signets or like bounce lands to really be A, oppressive, and B, making like 5 color control like the big boogeyman of the format. And like, I remember looking at like somebody on Reddit was talking about like how they might be too good. So I looked at all the 3-0s that I had, and I was like, so I looked at all these, and I had what is this, 26 items? Yeah, 26 drafts. How many? I'm gonna put you on the spot here. 26 drafts. How many 3-0 decks have signets?
All right, so I'm looking here, and I'm just like, I've got your list open, and I'm just looking at like early drops and looking at the aggressive options here. I'm gonna guess out of 26, I'm gonna go a little on the conservative side and say 3 to 4 of them have signets in them.
Okay, it was 6, and one of them was a Azorius aggro deck that wanted it for Metalcraft. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. Like, I looked at that, and like I think like 10 or 11 had bounce lands just because they're the best lands in the format, which is fine. But even then, like, kind of the supposed boogeymen of the format, like Sprout Swarm or Capsize or Guarding the Guild Pact, which people, kind of shy away from sometimes because they're considered too good, like really weren't the best, like the most 3-0 decks. So you have my list in front of you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to guess the card that has the most 3-0s.
Ooh, man.
And I'm gonna eliminate a good amount by saying it's not really seeing play in Pauper Constructed.
It's not seeing play in Pauper Constructed.
Yeah, at least as far as I know. If it is, I'm gonna feel really dumb. But I don't think it is.
I'm really tempted for this to be like one of these like 3-drops that's just slightly too slow for Constructed.
Yeah. Oh, it isn't a card that's been banned either from Pauper Constructed either.
Okay. That is helpful. That does. I think you have almost every banned card in here besides Cloud Post. So
yeah, plating is really good as it turns out.
Yeah. Although it's a lot less of a problem when you can't have every one of your lands also be an artifact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
I've got to imagine it's something like a Tended Knight or something silly like that, where it's just a good solid role player.
You're actually on the right path. So it is a 3-drop. It's not technically a creature, but it's a creature.
Not technically a creature, but it's a creature. So
yeah, like you can counter it with negate, but not remove soul. But for all intents and purposes, it's a creature.
Oh, and it can't be Hordling Outburst because that's fairly recent.
No, I've done 0 drafts with it. So
I've got to imagine
my first Pauper.
I got to imagine that's going to be real enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm doing my first Pauper Cube draft tomorrow with the A25 stuff, and I'm really excited.
Oh, that like there's some good gets. I also know you got Court Hussar in here, which is going to be.
Yeah. Oh my.
Oh, is it? No. Okay. I honestly don't know. I'm looking through this list and I can't figure out I can't see a 3-drop that is. Oh, okay. It's Renegade Freighter, isn't it?
No, it actually isn't.
What?
I know.
Oh.
I'll spoil it for you. Sickle Slicer.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's had 6 3-0s.
Just the fact that it's a 3-mana 2/2 that also happens to buff everything after it dies.
I think so, yeah. I was shocked when I saw that. I'm just like, man, Sickle Slicer doing work. And I'm just like, just looking through them, I was like, wait, what? Like, this has more wins than, Capsize or Sprout Swarm or Guardian of the Guild Pact or Cranial Plating or Hopeful Eidolon or trying to think of some other Pestermite or Silkbind Fairy or Battle Screech or Triplicate Spirits and Predatory Knights.
I've got to say, I'm a little surprised it wasn't Renegade Freighter. After I saw that, I remember, like, I've got to imagine that card is even better than it was in Kaladesh Limited, because that card was already a absurd thing at common in like a full-fledged limited format.
Yeah, it is quite nice. But you were really close though. That was really good.
Well, I saw it and I was just like, oh yeah, there's a 3-mana 5/4 with trample here.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, that's pretty much
gotta be it. But
yeah, I didn't really find like bounce lanes or any of those to be super impressive. Like, most of the decks like end up being like, meat and potato kind of 2-color decks, maybe splashing for 3, but just like like that white deck. I think that was in the one that kind of leads with Ardent Recruit and Court Homunculus. I think that was in one of the ones I sent you, right?
Yeah. I've seen Court Homunculus, Bodyguard, Inspector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All these like very low to the ground Vault Scourge. And then like it's not even a curve. It just kind of drops off as the mana cost increase.
And like an Ornithopter, which is like, sure, why not? Just it's for Frogmite. I didn't draft. I think I drafted the red blue deck with like Bloodlust Insider and Scorch Rusalka. And I didn't draft. Like I haven't drafted like any of those decks, but it's like so interesting as a cube designer seeing that kind of stuff happen. Like I think I played this deck and got crushed. Like
there's also some like interesting things that I noted. Like you have, what is it, Thriving Grubs in there as literally the only way to bake energy.
Oh man, it's 3/2, whatever. So it is what it is.
I actually, the thing that kind of shocks me more is the fact that none of the Aether Cycle, the commons that all can all get 2 energy when they ETB and can pay 2 energy to make a 1/1. I'm kind of surprised none of those made it in there, especially with the artifact
I think Chaser was the one I tried, but it's just 2 drops were just, there was just a lot of them. I just didn't have room. And that's another thing too, is just when you have a cube, is just it's kind of a cliche. We talk about the third power of white 4s being so stacked, and it's here's this really cool 4-drop, but white 4s, I guess everything at 4 nowadays, red 4s are getting really good now, Hazard and Hellrider and Rekindling Phoenix, all these 4-drops are just really absurd.
Oh, and what is it, Glorybringer?
Yeah.
Glorybringer's a 4-drop, right? Or is that 5?
5. It's 5.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, FTK, all these old standbys. Let me see if I can find another cool deck. I remember there was somebody who, they drafted the. I'm gonna actually see if I can. Let's see if I can find that timestamp here. Actually, I'll show it to you later. Maybe. Actually, I probably can send it to you on here. But essentially, it was 2 years ago, I guess, because I have these all dated. So it was 2016 to 23, or 23rd rather. And he drafted this red-white aggro deck. He won round 1. And he's playing against somebody who drafted this, dirtily 5-color control Signet deck. And here you go. Oh, no, wait, I had to send it, actually. Here it comes. Okay, there you go. You should have it now.
Oh, and it's in another window.
I don't know how to make this thing work.
I've got it. Oh, God. Yeah, no, you're just going to crush any deck that's not doing something before turn 3 with this.
Yeah, I saw him, I was all right, who are you playing? It's who are you playing? A Johnny Goldmane. It's all right, cool. Let me look through your deck. Because a Johnny Goldmane apparently loves playing 5-color Dirtle deck. And I just rifle through his deck. And I'm congrats on your win, man. And then he just crushed him. I'm just yeah, that's what happens. But yeah, I think that was one of the things where it's just being able to have that kind of data on hand lets you take some of that abstraction out and lets you be realistic about what's going on in your cube. Because sometimes even you can look through a list, even when I was looking at the 3-0s in my powered cube list and finding out Firebolt was quietly one of the better red cards, which is weird. Firebolt, especially with rares, you get stuff like Fiery Confluence and stuff, but good old Firebolt.
It's just the combo of it's good early game, and then you get that second use of it later in the game, and I don't know, it's always surprising to see the cards really overperform, because as I mentioned before, I have a Peasant Cube, and there's decently splashy stuff in that, but a lot of times it's stuff like Firebolt where it's just yeah, this is a built-in 2-for-1. And that just makes it leagues better than most of these splashy ETB creatures, because I'm late game worst case, this is a 6-mana deal 4. Sometimes that's what you need.
Yeah, I remember looking through my list when I was looking for cuts and being how about Firebolt? And looking through my 3-0s, I'm wow, this card's actually really good. Okay, ain't cutting that, but if you have the idea that certain cards are dominating or certain archetypes are dominating, if people are blue control is too good in your cube, but it only throws 1 draft or something out of 10, that's useful information to have. It's also good to maybe use that information to try to find out why that perception exists. If it's just somebody not playing correctly or something, or a misassessment. That's got to be a word, right? Misassessment.
Yeah, you got there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just figuring out, and utilizing that feedback. Even if it, may be coming from, if it may not be coinciding with your data, it's still useful to have that information too. Even when making cuts and stuff too, or shaping your cube. Not just quote unquote cutting the bad cards, but just trying to figure out what works. I used to have a an aristocrats kind of theme going on in my Pauper Cube with Phyrexian Ghoul,
Tuco
Husk, Blood Baron, and I think it's Vampire Aristocrat or something.
Yep.
Those are the 4.
Vampire is the third version of that exact same creature they've done, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right. And then there's so I think there's 4. I think there's Blood Baron, Aristocrat, Nantuko Husk, and Phyrexian Ghoul. Pretty sure there's 4, because I had 4. I remember they were kind of in the mix, and then like Bloodthrone Vampire, and then like Carrion Feeder, and Plague Rusalka, like all this sacrifice stuff, and like recursive creatures, which is like a cool idea. Like, and there are definitely decks that were utilizing it, but I just really wasn't super impressed with how they were working out in like the 3-0 representation. So I was like, let's see where I can go from here. You know, just like, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the deck too? It's also just realistically looking at things. I think, unfortunately, with a lot of, you know, when people evaluate cards or talk about Magic, a lot of it's very exaggerated, and it's kind of based on like talking points. Like, say, for example, talk about Thought-Knot Seer. You know, people are, you know, if they look at the card now, they're just like, oh, of course this is good because it's 4 mana, 4/4, and it does all this stuff. But a lot of it's kind of in the gray, you know, when the card wasn't tried out. It's just like, can you realistically use this? You know, is your opponent going to be hellbent when you use it? Will it not? And a lot of, you know, being able to utilize that information really helps. I guess that's a big thing with me nowadays as well, is just being able to utilize that information and kind of take ownership of how do you utilize that data. Like, it's really easy to just say something like, this is too good. Like, I can't play these cards because they're way too good or something. But being able to be realistic, and, you know, if those kind of decks are dominating, being able to, yeah, take ownership of what's going on and say, all right, this is what I want to do. And I think that's another thing too, because a lot of people don't really take Cube as seriously as someone like me or something. You know, not a lot of people are just like, okay, what am I doing with this, huh? You know, there's a lot of more casual kind of thing. Again, maybe that's just me.
So I think one more thing that I do want to touch on here is I did look through, and I'm kind of curious about some of your decisions when it comes to both counter magic and removal, because I'm noticing compared to, for example, Adam Staborski's list, you're playing a decent amount more sort of conditional counter spells where you've got stuff like Mana Leak or Force Spike or Daze. And I'm also seeing like the removal suite being, you know, fairly slim at instant speed. And I was kind of wondering if the other thing that I wanted to bring up, the fact that you have, I think, every like possible version of a Wrath effect available for Pauper.
Yeah, I was about to say, they're slim at best. I never ran Desert Sandstorm because like requiring Threshold is kind of pointless.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, that's a little tough.
Yeah, it's like, I need to clear the board. I need stuff in the graveyard first.
like if I really want to get technical, I will count Pyrotechnics and Rolling Thunder as possibly board wipes, but
yeah, those are like Plague Winds or something. It's like, how much are you at? I can't kill you. All right, what's the compactness? Okay, clear your board.
Yeah. I just thought it was interesting because, you know, by limiting that instant speed removal, is that something you also think is kind of helping out the lower to the ground aggressive decks?
I don't know.
Kind of tweaking it in their favor a little bit.
You know, I haven't really noticed. Like, what colors are you seeing that in? Like, in black, I know there's, like, it's kind of the issue with a lot of the stuff in the format where, at least in Constructed, say you get, like, a really good, something that sets the bar, like Maul Drifter, you know, just like, here's this nice thread, and this defines the context for, like, a mid-range thing. You know, here's, I don't know, Frenzied Goblin. You know, once you have those, tend to define the context a lot more. And I think that kind of influences people's discussion, even if it's not necessarily constructed too, is how things are defined by. I'm trying to think, like in black, I think. Like I had stuff like Innocent Blood, I think.
Well, so I'm looking. I pulled up, thanks to Cube Tutor's handy dandy, you know, compare two cubes feature, and compared to Adam's cube, which is, you know, one of the other high profile Pauper cubes, he has 8 black instants you don't have, and 6 of them are removal spells. He's got Ghastly Demise, Regicide, Tragic Slip, Devour Flesh, Nameless Inversion, and Rend Flesh.
I swear I had an Abel's inversion.
And
I don't know. I sometimes tend to make a bunch of changes and then change stuff after. Like, oh, whoops. And then change. Sometimes I tend to look at cube changes kind of like a snapshot when you're driving. You know, it's not necessary. It's like the destination. It's like, here's me in Columbia, Missouri, driving from St. Louis to Kansas City. I don't know. But yeah, like, I'm trying to think, like, I ran Tragic Slip for some time and it was just fine. Like, Devour Flesh was kind of similar. Like, it was fine. I never really was a huge fan of a lot of like the expensive 3-mana removals I see in Pauper Cube lists, like Murder or like Renflesh. The one that, because Renflesh essentially is like,
it's Murder.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm like, if you have a Pauper Cube and you have Murder, but you don't have Renflesh, like, that's a pretty easy like switch. But like, it was one of those things I remember when kind of refining my list was like it was actually another friend. His name is Matt, who I think he's moved to Kansas. I don't know if he still has his Pauper Cube, but I remember like he had all like the Oxida Golem, whatever, the cycle, like Spire Golem, Oxida Golem.
The affinity for land type.
Yeah.
Golems.
There would be like, yeah, like I had all of them, like Dross Golem, Tangle Golem, whatever, what's the white one? Razor Golem, Spire Golem, Oxida Golem. And I think he only had a few. And I was like, yeah, wait a minute. That was another thing I think was a big thing in my cube writing as well, is like people were just like really gung-ho on including cycles. Like, I got to have this cycle. I'm like, why? Like, it's one of those things like, I don't know if you've watched The Angry Video Game Nerd. Like, you ever watched his videos before?
I'm familiar.
Okay. Like, I remember there was one of them episodes, you know, for those playing along, he's, you know, a video game reviewer who curses a lot. Don't worry, I'm not going to do that because that ain't how I roll. But on one of the episodes, I think it was like, what was it, Friday the 13th or something? He was talking about like how you would really put forth all this effort into beating a game. Like, you would just agonize yourself to beat this game. And then he said one of the lines, which is probably really interesting thing in cube design. It was like, but the cold hard fact is nobody cares but you. And it was like one of those things with like people putting in this cycle, like immersing a cube that had like a cycle of artifacts, like a Sunbeam Spell Bomb, and I forget what it was. I think it was like Moriak Rigor, and it was a powered cube, so it had other stuff like, and then Birthing Pod, and like, you know, people would possibly see this cycle, but they wouldn't care. Like, the only person that would care is the cube designer. It's like, man, look at this cool cycle. And then everybody else would look at this like Sunbeam Spellbomb, like, what? And then just pass it because it's bad. The card's not good. But it's like,
yeah, there's definitely like a temptation for pet cards. Like, my Peasant Cube has had, I've had to, like, at this point just tell myself, no, you're never allowed to put Thopter Foundry and Sword of the Meek into this cube. Like,
oh yeah,
I love the combo to death, but like, it's not good in cube.
Yeah.
It just isn't.
I think that's another thing too with having like that data on hand is like, sometimes it's really easy, especially with the themes too as well. It's just like, it's really easy to convince yourself like this pet card is good, because like that video that the professor had, you know, talking about, you know, there's no jank, but nobody puts a card in their cube or keeps a card in their cube because it's jank. Even if it just isn't that good. Like, there's usually some talking points they'll use to convince themselves for it. It's just like, all right, what's this card here? I'm just using this because it's on my shelf. Renewed Faith. Like, man, what does this card do? It gains you a bunch of life. You can cycle. When you cycle, it does this, so it helps against the burn matchup, against red. Like, again, you can convince yourself of all of these talking points, but the reality may end up completely different. Like, despite all this, or just like, I had this friend who signed a copy of, oh man, I can't find a bad card. Quick, it's time to look through random junk. Tundra Wolves. Yeah, that's too terrible. No one's gonna put Tundra Wolves in their cube. Come on. Let's see, man. I gotta find a bad. What's a card that you've had that's like a pet card, or a pet card you've seen in other cubes?
Okay. I actually have a pet card that I actually just cut out of my Peasant Cube. Darksteel Sentinel. It is a 6 generic mana 3/3 with Flash Vigilance and Indestructible.
Yeah, I remember that card. It was like Flash Vigilance or something. It was weird. But yeah, it's like,
well, so I defended it for years because it was just like the ultimate out of nowhere gotcha. And then like you strap on like, I don't know, Loxodon Warhammer and just beat someone to death with this stupid creature. And I finally had that moment where it was like, this really isn't that good. If your plan is like get to 6 mana, that might not be a great one. And at that point, I'm also just running stuff like Capsize in my cube. So like, if you're planning for that super late game, I'm going to get you slowly out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Just run a better win con. That's all there is.
Yeah. Like there's a much better payoff. And I assume it was another situation too, where probably a lot of people had it in their sideboard where it could have been in their main deck. Like they were probably playing like a control deck, but they didn't have it in their deck.
Yeah. It was just one of those things where like, I like the card from a design perspective, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't seeing enough play to justify its continued existence in the cube.
And at the end of the day, the only person that cared about the card was you.
Exactly. So,
by the way, I assume you're playing Heirloom Blade in your Peasant Cube, right?
I actually just picked one up.
Nice. I was going to say like that card is so good.
I have not personally had a chance to draft it, but the one person so far who has said that it was just like they had to pull up the oracle, pull up a bunch of oracle text to make sure all the creature types are right. Yeah. But I think they said that no creature of theirs actually ever whiffed just because of all these incidental like, oh, these two creatures happen to be shamans. These two creatures happen to be wizards. Like, they both got retconned to humans. So
yeah, like all these retcon humans. Remember there was one deck, I think it was like Goblin Guide and like some other random, was it Tireless Tracker? I think it was Goblin Guide and Tireless Tracker were the two scouts in the deck. I'm just like, are you kidding? It was like, sorry, I'm going to double check. I'm pretty sure it was Tireless Tracker.
But yeah, it
was Tireless Tracker.
I feel like one of the things about Cube is just like you do have to be willing to like sit there every so often and just be like, all right, I got to sit down, I got to crunch numbers, and I got to figure out what doesn't work here.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's like it's kind of like even like it's like constructed where and in a cube you're essentially designing a lot of decks in a way, and it's kind of like that in constructed where and nobody's mental deck tech is for a deck that they think will 05. Like no one looks at the when Saffron Olive or whoever at the Pro Tour is doing their deck tech, no one is going like this. Look at this deck sucks. Like look at this bad. Like, nobody's doing that. Like it's all an idea of the synergy between cards. Like trying to think of a recent example, like the mono white go wide deck that Andrew Beckstrom had. I don't know if you've seen that with like the Snubhorn Sentry and Pride of Conquerors.
No, I have not seen this.
Okay, so it's like this white weenie deck in constructed that or in standard that like goes really wide and it's able to get ascend because of cards like Legion's Landing, Servo Expedition. I'm trying to remember, those are the big ones. There's some other stuff, and then just like a lot of really good white aggressive stuff. And then you use all these 2-for-1s to get 10 permanents, and then like you get a whole lot of benefit, like Sky Marcher, Aspirant, the Savannah Lines that gains flying. That card's also great in Cube. Snubhorn Sentry, which is able to attack. Pride of Conquerors, which is 1 and a white for +1/+1 till EOT, and then if you have the City's Blessing, it gets +2/+2. Like when somebody looks at the deck, it's like, okay, these are these cards that are being synergistic. I mean, that's pretty much what I just did. It's like this card does this. The Legion's Landing gets you 2 permanents. Servo Expedition gets you 2 permanents. Like all this, I don't think SRAM's expertise is played, but you could, in theory, justify it being like this creates 3 permanents. Like, and sometimes it's just you make a deck. Like you say, you go to a GP or to go to FNM, and you have a deck full of amazing cards. These cards are all great. Like you say you have Gonti and Glorybringer and Fatal Push. Like I'm trying to come up with a red black deck on the fly, and I don't play standard. Gifted Etherborn. You got all these great cards, and your deck just 1/2s. And let's assume you played fine, but the deck is just, it's not working. Like the synergies aren't there. Like it lines up poorly against the format because everybody's playing control or something. It's not working out. It doesn't mean the cards are bad. It's just, the whatever it is ain't working. And I think it's easy for people to kind of fall into that too. It's just like, this ain't working. It's like, this card's bad. Like I remember screen capping something from SCG chat the first week after Ixalan came out, and I'm gonna see if I can find. I have it on my desktop here. It's on here somewhere, I think. No, maybe not. But there was like SCG, just chat. Twitch chat is of course Twitch chat, and like somebody was going on saying like, LOL, Carnage Tyrant is bad, and then someone was like, LOL, don't you mean the $30 Terra Stomper? And it's not really based in reality. I think it was just doing bad that week. But, just going like, okay, here's this card. I'm going to outsource it to standard. It's not performing well.
Yeah.
And then boom, let's stamp it. Like, let's do the stamp. This card's bad. Like, okay, we've got, the council has decided that this card is bad. But that's not how things work. Sometimes like a strategy you put in your cube and it just doesn't work. Maybe it needs something like, maybe, let's say you put Storm in your cube, but you kind of half do it. Like you put in all the Storm cards, but no rituals or no ways to dig or untap your lands. That ain't going to work. And you can very easily look at that and be like, wow, this is bad. Or you could make like an aggressive deck, which is what a lot of people did back in the day. They would just put they would kind of phone in the aggressive supports. Like, all right, Jackal Pup sucks, so let's take it out. So, no Savannah Lions because no, they're bad too. So let's put in 1/1 drop or something, and then they would find their aggressive decks are bad, or they would have Jackal Pup as like their one drop, and then the meat would be 3 drops and be like, wow, this ain't working because I'm drawing on turn 4. This deck is bad. It's like, no. That's not reality. That's not how it works. It can be very easy to just look at it and be like, all right, here's this, boom. Which is kind of a little contrary to me talking about using data and doing that, but I think that's why I probably do both. Being able to utilize data and being able to correctly figure out context and your meta. Again, not really sure where that came from, but that's what you signed up for.
Oh yeah, no. I full well know the tangential tendency, but I think one of the good things is like one of the best parts about Cube is you can always fix the environment. It's not like standard where you have to wait for rotation. This is just okay. XYZ decks aren't doing great. What can I do to either bring down the power level of the decks that prey upon these decks? Or what can I do to boost the power level of these decks?
Yeah. And even like you were saying earlier in terms of like less instant seed fixing. I mean, I had no idea. Like, and that's something I could look at too, is just like, if that's something where, I want to change up how things are going, like that's certainly something I can do. Like, I think it's something like Craney came up with a term and I've been kind of using as well. It's kind of like called an on deck binder, which is where you put cards that just aren't in your cube because they're not bad. You're just not using them. Like I have a stack of foils that I got from M25, and I got stuff like Elvish Aberration, Dreamstalker, Wild Mongrel, Colossal Dreadmaw, Kavu Climber, Vessel of Nascency, Wildheart Invoker, Haunted Fengra, Quicksand, Shoreline Ranger, Dead Reveler, Warren Pilfers, Corrupt, Dirge of Dread, Chandra's Outrage, Chartooth Cougar, Thresher Lizard. And like, I didn't spend money on these cards being like, wow, these cards are going to be bad. I feel like wasting money. No, I don't feel like wasting my money, but I just don't have them in my cube right now. But say I wanted to, try to change the high drops in green. I mean, Elvish Aberration is an option. Colossal Dreadmaw is an option. Wild Heart Invoker is an option. Like, you have options that you can customize your cube in. And I feel like, at least at Pauper, there's not as much like entrenched kind of ideas. It's like, this card is good. Like, Blade Splicer is stone cold staple. And that's whenever I've done my cube articles, like reviews, and I still do those on Gathering Magic. I don't tend to use like cube sizes as a measure because personally, I find it kind of describes kind of a status quo of what a cube is. Like I remember years ago, somebody being like, "Vampire Interlopers, 360 staple, not close," and I was like, "What? No, that just means you really like the card. That doesn't mean it's like absurd, or just kind of gauging where it is, on this arbitrary scale. It's like, what if you have a really lean multicolor section? What if it's really huge? What if you have a lot of lands versus less lands? Like, say I looked up new land and, a random colorless land. Let's say, I don't know, Field of Ruin. Sure. If I had like a bigger land section, I could be like, okay, this is a whatever size staple that's relative to my own experience versus smaller. It's generally why I tend to say stuff like this card is a good card. Like when a Frenzied Goblin was downshifted, I was like, this card is like top tier. Like this is like an absurd 1-drop in red. Same thing with Jackal Pup. It's like, if you want aggressive decks to be and I forget the exact phrasing I used, so something like a viable and healthy part of your metagame, play this card because it is a quality card. And there might come a day when that card there's not much room for it. But that doesn't mean the card is quote unquote bad or anything. It just means it may not be able to meet with competition. Like say Court Homunculus, say white 1-drops get so good that I can't put it, like I just realistically can't fit it in anymore. Does that mean it's bad? Like, no, of course not. If I saw it in a Pauper Cube, like I would probably play it if I was in some kind of aggressive white deck, or like Step Links or something like that. Like if that ended up getting cut, who knows? But I think that's a thing in terms of Cube, like you talked about, where it is a lot of customization, where it can feel very constrained, but I think that's a thing too, is just kind of letting go of a lot of that kind of stuff. Like when I try stuff out, like whenever I try new cards out, because I try new stuff out very aggressively, to make sure there's good data behind it. Just like I'm trying to remember, there's a card that I think Heirloom Blade is a card that people kind of slept on. I was like, this card's very good. I'm going to try this out, and it was good. And like Rekindling Phoenix, I think was another one. I was like, this card is quite good. I'm going to try it out, and then we're going to see what happens. But, you got to cut stuff out to try it. And, sometimes I was just like, I'm going to try this card out. I'm going to cut, let's say, PNLR or something. Like, I'm going to cut this card for the moment, to try it out because, I got to find room for it. Does that mean I think PNLR is bad? Of course not. But it's just something to play around with. If I wanted to have more kind of more mid-rangey or more kind of wildfire-y kind of stuff going on, that's something you can do. Like there's a lot of knobs you can kind of do. And I guess that brings it back to when you're talking about in standard, like with Llanowar Elves being printed in Dominaria. For years, WotC was like something on Maro's blog, on Blogatog. He talked about how someone was asking, like, are we going to see Elvish Mystic back? Are we going to see cards like Elvish Mystic, Heliod's Pilgrim, not Heliod's Pilgrim, Avacyn's Pilgrim. Yeah. It's like these 1-drops, are we going to see them again? And, Maro, he's in design, he's not in development, because that ain't his job. It was in Urza's block, and we saw how that happened. So, and he said something because, he doesn't, that's not his realm. He said development deemed 1-mana accelerants too good for standard. And you can even, and I believe that's what he said, like in terms of his phrasing. It was very distant. It was like, this ain't my decision. That's what development said, so I can't do it. It's, y'all decided that, so I can't do that. But in Dominaria, of course, they brought it back because that's a knob that they can turn to see what that does to the format. And that's something they've done before too, in terms of like, with Lightning Bolt, bringing that back and dialing that back, just like taking out shock, or, just kind of playing, certain knobs of the format and seeing where that goes. Some cards can very strongly define a format, like when Jace, a Mind Sculptor, was in standard. people would talk about the Jace test, where cards like Abyssal Persecutor were, there was no chance that you could play those cards. And someone could look at this and being like, all right, what's wrong with Abyssal Persecutor? Let's read the card. All right, let's see here. 4 mana, 2 and 2 black, flying trample, 6/6. You can't win the game, and your opponents can't lose the game. Whoa, that's big. That's the reason why this card ain't seen play, because you can't win. So this card's bad. It's like, no, it's because Jace made it irrelevant. Like, you couldn't do it because Jace was one of the top decks, and it defined the threats of the format. Like, what's that? Phyrexian Obliterator and Hero of Bladehold. Those were
all these really objectively powerful cards that just didn't see play because the metagame wouldn't allow for it at the time.
Yeah, and that defined the context. And in Cube, you can have those contexts, and they can change over time. But it's not quite as absolute. Like, someone can say something like Savannah Lions isn't good enough for good enough for Powered Cube anymore because there's better ones out there. Certainly worse. I wouldn't say it's not good enough, but like, you can define your removal suites. You can define your high end. And I feel like sometimes people are a little too scared to play with those boundaries. Like, if there's a new Wrath, like, there's the idea that if you put in an extra Wrath, like, suddenly your cube is going to be a quote unquote dragon cube, which is like a derogatory term for, everybody playing Battlecruiser Magic or just playing dragons because the early game is bad. But just being too scared sometimes, I find sometimes tends to happen. And yeah, like, you can change that kind of stuff. Like, say there's another good Wrath at common. I don't know when that's going to happen, but we can dream, just like if that happens, being able to, if you're trying out your Pauper Cube and you see this new Wrath, it's like, you don't have to trade it up because your cube shouldn't be this kind of static thing. It's like, all right, it's this many cards split down the middle, this many creatures, this many non-creatures, this many, because yeah, like, say you split into creatures, like Sickle Slicer, you can counter it with a negate, but it's a creature for all intents and purposes. If you're doing your mana curve, that's going to be a creature because, let's be completely honest, that's what it is. It's a creature. And then I think that's as well, just being able to just play around with your format. Just like, if you want to, bolster your Reanimator decks to, see how Shield Dread works in there, see how Massacre Worm or what Tetsamok, there's options out there. Like, you can try those, to try out new Wraths. Like, Massacre Worm is a Wrath. It's kind of clunky, but it's a Wrath. And then, or like Living Death, just being able to look at options and being able to change your environment, and yeah, not to be too scared. It's like, I see a Wrath, I have to put this other Wrath. I see this 1-drop, I gotta cut a 1-drop. It's like, no, you can figure it out. Like, you can customize your environment. And I think that's probably the big takeaway, I would say, in terms of not necessarily, or I guess in terms of everything Cube, is just like being a Cube designer is being able to shape and mold your environment. Because yeah, I think even in that Tolarian Community College video, he talked about, congratulations, you're a developer or you're a designer. And, have you seen, again, I can't really remember off the top of my head because it's been a while, but he kind of talked about how, there's people in WotC who make sets, and now you can be one of them by having a cube.
Yeah, I mean, that is really the dream. Just being able to get that limited environment just right, because every so often WotC really does have those huge home run sets. Like, I think, what was it? Hour of Devastation's limited environment was like easy top 3 of all time for me. Just like, oh, wow, really, really solid. And I took some of the things that I learned from there. Like, it's great when every color pair is draftable and it's fine.
Yeah.
Like, that's actually like a big thing. And like, showing like how valuable having an abundance of like cheap mana fixing really helps make like some really interesting decks. Like, I've told this story on the podcast before. One of my favorite decks I ever drafted, I got stupidly lucky and opened Approach to the Second Sun and Overwhelming Splendor, and I built a 4-color control deck around those two, and I resolved, I think over the course of a 3-round F&M draft, I think I resolved 4 Overwhelming Splendors, and every time it was just like, okay, I get to explain humility to a player who's probably never played against it, and then, drop protection of the Heckma, which whenever a source deals damage to you, you prevent 1 of that damage. And then just explaining to someone, unless you have main deck enchantment removal, I think I have locked you out of this game. But like, I do think that like Cube is a great way to kind of customize a draft environment. Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah.
So
I think that was the thing too, is just like, I don't know if you looked at my list and looked at my fixing, bounce lands aside, like I'm not running any of the guild gates right now, but again, I don't think.
No, it looks like you gain lands.
Yeah, I run the gain lands, and I think that's another thing where it's not like, I don't think they're bad, but it's like, let's see how the environment is without them. See how things go. My apologies, didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh no. It's I just wanted to get to the fact that we've been chatting for a while here. I
was about to say, is this your longest episode?
It may well be. We just finished a primer series, nice, which is technically kind of one 3-hour long continuous episode, but I think this is. I think it's mainly that I don't have Adrian here to like subtly put in the text chat like, hey, we need to stop.
Yeah.
It's been like an hour.
To reel it in, like, hey, you've been talking for... Yeah. I remember like Anthony I would sometimes do that. It's just like, oh my God, we've been recording for 3 hours or something. It's like, I need to sleep. I remember there was one, I forget which episode it was, but there was one I was dead. I was just dead by the end of it. I was just like, I mean, you could tell, like, listening to the episode, like, the wheels were just off, and like, I was like, yeah, it wasn't like asleep, but I was just like drained. And being after the episode, I'm like, dude, I'm passing out. Good night.
If it's any consolation, I do tend to try and save episodes of your podcast for when I know I'm about to go on a plane ride, so that way I can guarantee that I have enough podcasts to get me through.
Nice. We try to give people's non-existent money for what it's worth. I mean, because we record like so not often. Because I was looking at the software you're using, them, it's like you get a certain amount of data per 6 months, and it's like at first like that doesn't seem like much. I'm like, we only record like once every 3 months, so this is fine.
Yeah, you only get 8 hours a month, but if you're only recording once every 3 months, works out. All right, so
yeah, if we somehow record an 8-hour episode, oh my God, like that would just be a nightmare.
All right, so I do want to thank you for coming on today and talking about Pauper Cube. This is an episode I've wanted to do for a while, and it really is an Adrian's jam. He's not a limited fan, but I do really want to thank you for taking a decent chunk of time out of your day so that we can record this. And if folks at home want to hear more like this, where can they find you?
So I recently changed our blog from I'd Rather Be Cubing, because it was kind of non-intuitive, to the Third Power blog. No, the Third Power podcast.wordpress.com. Again, in theory, I'm going to write more there. When I have rebooted my Pauper Cube, I've put more stuff there. Like I've talked about kind of where I've been going with it and how I've been pretty happy with its current iteration. And then I'm on Twitter at Usman the Rad, and I believe that's it. One thing I did want to say though, real quick, like if you are interested in making a cube, just in general, like just if you have the resources, and it's a lot easier, if you have a group to pool them, like just go for it. Like, in worst case, a lot of the cards are pretty cheap. Like we were talking about this before, like what's it, like the most expensive card that I think tends to see play. Well, I guess nowadays, like Chainers has gone up a whole bunch. Chainers Eaters.
Chainers is like $12, but outside of that,
wow.
Yeah,
I've got like 3 of those, and I think one I accidentally ordered an extra of the FTV one. Wow. And I guess Chainers $2.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, like the rest of it's super cheap. And like the most expensive card probably is not the card, but just like sleeves, just getting a whole bunch. But if you have a group, and you want to try it out, like go for it. Or even one thing you can do is just like go to a cube tutor list, go to a cube tutor pauper list or even a peasant list or, anything, do that and just run some sample drafts and just, see what happens. Like if that looks cool to you, it's just like, man, I just forced a mono red deck and like, this seems interesting. Like, and if you have the resources, just go for it. Just because, a lot of the stuff that I had was just kind of lying around. I mean, I've been playing for forever, so I had a good amount of the stuff. Like I quit. I wasn't playing during Invasion and Odyssey and Onslaught, and then kind of a little bit during Merit. And, like when I got back in the game, I saw the meta and I saw that meta was Ravager Affinity and Tooth and Nail. And I was like, sorry, I guess I'm playing limited now. But, I didn't have a lot of that stuff, but, a lot of this stuff's pretty cheap. You can probably just get it off like TCG Player or in bulk or something, or if somebody has duplicates, especially the new stuff. Like with people opening these, M25 boxes, people are just going to have a lot of these random cards, like these like White Mane Lions and, Elvish Aberrations and looking through stuff here to see, it's like Savannah Lions, like they're commons, and no one's going to, like most people are going to be like, I have no use for this, and just leave it as draft chaff after it's done. And that's a nice way of just getting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Like a lot of these new commons from like the last few sets, they cap out at like 5 cents.
Yeah.
So there a lot of this is very cheap. There's a handful of cards in here that are frankly absurdly pricey because of recent spikes, but by and large, most of these.
Which other ones are there?
Ponder and Preordain are both like a couple of bucks a piece.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of anything else here.
Like I don't play Obliette just because it's an expensive murder, but I assume if somebody wants to play that, it's probably a lot. Is Quambodge Witches expensive?
No. That one's cheap in paper. I think it's still kind of pricey online, and Ash Barons is down to like $2. So
nice.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's got things have gotten cheaper, and also other things have gotten a lot more expensive. So
yeah, Devoted Druid. That's probably a lot now.
I think it's like a handful of bucks, but like that's also something you could definitely replace.
Yeah, it's not
like it is very good, but it's not irreplaceable.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything, if you can't, if you don't have access to a certain card, don't be afraid to try something else. And I think that's sometimes, I think people tend to do, like when they create a cube, is they tend to get kind of scared on making a list, just wanting to make it perfect, and I think people tend to sometimes overthink or overemphasize the beginning and then kind of underdo like the evaluation of, keeping up with that kind of stuff. And I think it's sometimes kind of hard to do, especially if you're building a list. But just, I think that part is just kind of, if you're building a cube and you're kind of scared of doing it, just take it one step at a time. Like I think that video set on Life Begins at 20, kind of talking about it. I did some articles too for Quiet Speculation about kind of building the foundations of your cube, but you don't have to do it all in one sitting. And if you have a group, like you can talk with other people about it. Like I mainly do a lot of cube changes myself because like I'm a tyrant and I do it all myself, and I'm kind of used to doing stuff myself anyway. But like if you have a group to be able to, talk about cube changes with, like I've seen some people do that, like, yeah, utilize it. If you want to, talk about like, do I want to have a big multicolor section or a little one, or, how do I want to do it? Like, you can change that kind of stuff. Like, it's not like static. It's like when people talk about, do I make a power cube or non-powered cube? It's like, how many cards is that? Like what, 10? Like 15? Like you don't have to lock in. Like if you want to change it, change it. That's fine. Don't get too scared of, doing it. Just do it probably in little pieces. Like, all right, maybe today I'll do the sections or something. And then maybe I'll figure out the Wooburg, do white, do blue, in pieces, just because if you look at it, a big thing, it's like, oh my God. And also just being able to compare to other lists too really helps.
Yeah, it's definitely a constant work in progress. You're never done with your cube list.
Yeah. I was about to say there's a concept, it's a Japanese concept called Kaizen. I've probably talked about it in, I don't know if I talked about it on the podcast, but definitely have in writing. It's the concept of kind of continuous improvement. It was used a lot in, I know, in Japanese manufacturing, like in the 80s, like during like when Toyota was like really dominant in the car market, in terms of just like looking for ways to improve, even if something just looks, like if you have like a process going on, like a process design or like a assembly line, and you can look at like an assembly line build cars, it's like, you're good to go. You can build cars. Yeah. There might be ways to do it. There might be a better way to utilize like the layout or how the parts are being put together. Obviously, I have no idea how any of this works because I don't know anything about cars, but just being able to, I think that's a big part too in terms of Cube, is just like not just looking at something that's like, here's a pile of cards that works. Yeah. Just being able to look a bit deeper, look at your data, if you can if you can look at 3.0 decks, being able to utilize that data, use all that information really tends to help.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So with that said, I think we can call this show to a close.
Yeah, I hear that.
I got to get some sleep at some point, really.
Are you in Eastern?
Yeah. So
oh yeah,
I'm even an hour ahead. So
yeah.
I do again want to thank you for joining us. This is an episode I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm really glad that I managed to get someone who actually knows what they're talking about to talk about it with me.
Sure. I really appreciate it.
So yeah, thanks a bunch. It was really, really fun. So thanks for joining us, listeners. This podcast is brought to you by the support of our patrons. Consider supporting us if you like the show. You can check below this video or the description of the podcast for details where to find us. We're also going to include information about Usman, his podcast, his cube, some decks that he has sent over that have 3.0'd his cube, all sorts of juicy details in the description below this. There'll be good information. And if you have any suggestions for the show, you can always email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. We also have a contact form on our website where you can just kind of get in touch with us directly that way. But for Mike and Usman, this has been Color Commentary.